I'm going to start the recording. Okay, now, wait, before I do that, all right, here we go. All right, well, thank you, Professor Notestein, for taking part in this Evanston Magazine interview. First of all, I want to say congratulations on your appointment. I think the article that was sent to me stated that September 1st, you began, although reading further, it stated that you've been involved since, I think, 07.
Yeah, so I was appointed director of the Center for Catalysis and Surface Science, which is a center within Northwestern University.
Right.
But I've been at Northwestern University as a faculty member since 2007.
That's correct. And can you give my audience, because my audience is primarily Evanstonians and North Shore people, give them a little bio on yourself so that they'll know who you are.
Yeah, so again, my name is Justine Notestein. I've been living in the Chicago area since 2007 when I came to work at Northwestern University. I lived in the city of Chicago for the first year, but since then I've lived in Evanston. My son is an elementary school teacher here, a student here. My wife is an elementary school teacher here, so we're very much Evanston residents.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Watching me give this interview.
That's good.
Yeah, but I grew up in Texas. I actually did undergraduate work in New Jersey. I did my PhD in California. So I've lived all over at this point, but I'm very proud to say that Evanston is my home now.
Well, that's awesome. So how did you come to end up at Northwestern?
So in my particular research area, Northwestern has actually been a world leader since probably the 1930s. So this center that I'm now the director of has its origins way back then, mostly with the work of one particular individual, Vladimir Apadiev, who's been doing groundbreaking work in this area, again, almost a century ago. And so when I was looking for a place to teach and do research, I liked the research history here at Northwestern, and I immediately liked the campus and the environment, and so I thought this would be a good place to stay. So.
Well, I love Northwestern's campus and everything about Evanston, so thank you for picking Evanston, and we'll keep this going. Now, so according to the article that introduced me to you, you guys are more, you have your hands in the majority of things that are sold in the commonplace market through plastics, and other things like that. Can you give us an idea of some of the products or some connections that you may have that you can express here?
Yeah, so catalysis is the study of how we enable chemical reactions through a catalyst. And a catalyst, including even in the lay terms, is something that helps enable, say, a reaction to happen in this case. And so anytime you have a large-scale chemical process to make anything that has a chemical, almost inevitably there's a catalytic reaction in there somewhere, and so our field studies that. The biggest and most obvious examples are all the fuel that would go into a car or an airplane or anything. That's all made by a catalytic process. In the tailpipe of your car, you have the catalytic converter, so that any residual materials are rendered harmless, at least to humans, as they come out the back end of your car. And then again, all the raw materials used to make, of course, plastics, because those are the largest scale types of things, go through catalytic processes. But of course, pharmaceuticals, flavors and fragrances, like virtually anything has gone through a catalytic process.
Yeah, so reading about it, it seems that it's extremely important, because I could imagine that the wrong chemical being mixed into the wrong container can be pushed on to the public and could cause harm. So
exactly, yeah.
You guys are pretty much a safety band-aid, I guess, for that.
Right, and that's actually a super good point, because if you look back, historically at how chemicals were produced, originally, and even today in certain areas, chemicals were just kind of made very crudely. You'd take like crude oil or natural gas or something, and you would just kind of bang on it with some heat, and you'd get a whole mix of things.
Right.
And you'd kind of do your best to separate out a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and some would go into gasoline, and some would then be raw materials for other things. But there'd be a lot of waste. And waste is not good for anyone. It's harmful for people if it's disposed of in the wrong way. It's bad for the environment, and it's bad economically. So one of the underlying things that the study of catalysis does is it helps you more selectively make things. So if we want to make this one particular chemical compound, we can make that without making a whole bunch of other things that maybe you don't want and could potentially be harmful as well.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. So also there's an aspect of this that's connected to the environment, which is kind of what you're implying or referring to right here. So what is Northwestern doing primarily to make sure that we're all safe, especially with our water and things like that?
So the Center for Catalysis and Surface Science, which is this center that I'm now part of, is within the Center for Energy and Sustainability, which is this larger institute at Northwestern. And so we're very concerned about these things. So if we consider, for example, water, one of the major problems that can lead to water pollution would be that certain species that might be used in a chemical process can be very toxic if they accumulate in water. So a good example would be, for example, chromium salts. So chromium salts are tracked very, very closely in the waters of Lake Michigan. Unfortunately, some of the historically used catalysts for one very important process have used chromium. So one of the things that we look for are replacement catalysts that not only do they make the process more efficient, but the catalysts themselves are made out of maybe earth-abundant materials and materials that are intrinsically less hazardous. So if we can do this with iron, which is more or less non-toxic, that's much better than doing it with, say, chromium or platinum.
That's cool. Now, for the layman, how do you kind of interpret that for someone who may not even know that chromium is a chemical on the on the periodic chart? For example, like every year, and I don't mean to simplify it so much, but we are talking to a large amount of people.
Of course,
some of them highly educated, some of them less highly educated. Every year, St. Patrick's Day, the water gets this green thing in it, right?
Yeah.
So can you kind of explain that? Tell us the pluses and minuses on that so that we can simplistically, attribute this conversation to real life stuff that somebody might be open to.
Okay, so I've actually got a fairly heavy one. So I'm forgetting the name of the movie. Perhaps we can go look it up. But it was recently about when DuPont was dumping the waste products from the PFOAs and things.
Yeah, and the lawyer, the lady lawyer.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's been a long history of that, and a lot of that comes down to that there's a particular chemical species that is desired, and then based on an older production method, there's a lot of waste that comes with it. And for better or for worse, there is sometimes, an undercurrent of human nature that says, hey, I've got this waste. I'm going to be secretive about it. And I'm going to dump it. And somebody is doing harm. One of the cool things about developing a catalytic process is now making something selectively so that you don't have waste is both the cheaper, better way of doing things, and it now doesn't have waste. So you kind of shortcut what can lead to some unethical decisions. So somebody's going, oh, I'm just going to be secretive and dispose of this waste. Well, if the better way is actually doing it both cheaper and with no waste, then you don't have this ethical dilemma anymore. And so one of the major goals of our center right now is developing ways that are more efficient so that it's a win for everybody. You don't have the waste that gets dumped in scenarios like you see in some of these movies,
Right.
and are very much real life. While at the same time, the chemical companies have all the incentive to do it that way because it's cheaper. It uses less energy. It doesn't have side products. So
Right.
we're trying to create these kind of win-win scenarios.
That's wonderful, and we appreciate that because we need our water and land to be,
Exactly.
toxic free. Speaking
Yeah.
of that, there's been conversation, especially in the Chicago area, that some of the old plants that used to do that method that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about have left areas of the city tainted.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys developing something that can now retroactively clean that up? Have you been focusing on anything in that area?
So over the years, Northwestern has actually done a lot of work in, what I would call broadly emissions and environmental catalysis. In fact, the name of the grant that we currently get money from the Department of Energy used to be what do they call it? The Institute for Environmental Catalysis. And so it actually worked specifically on developing ways to remove, for example, nitrogen oxides, which is one source of water pollution and air pollution from like large-scale factories and from the tailpipe of your car. So that's been a historical area of research for us for some time. There's been good collaborations amongst our center members with folks in, say, environmental engineering and chemical engineering, working on wastewater remediation. One project I've worked on personally used actually photocatalysis, so harnessing the power of just sunlight to break down unwanted chemicals that might exist in water, for example. So we've definitely worked in a lot of these spaces. The one thing I will say is that most of our work these days is fairly early stage in terms of what we receive funding for, in that we're less likely to be currently in the field developing a device, and we're more fairly early stage trying to develop things that would prevent processes that might come 5-10 years down the road from being harmful in the first place. But yeah, over time we've worked in a lot of different areas, including direct remediation of pollution.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So the another part that I did get a chance to explore was use. I don't know. The quote seemed to come directly from you,
Mm-hmm.
but it could have been placed in the article, But it had to do with inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an kind of a brief on what you guys, or what you as the new person in charge will be doing to make sure that there is inclusivity in your field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so unfortunately, the field of catalysis, like many aspects of engineering and chemistry, have been, first of all, mostly dominated by men. It has not included a lot of gender inclusion, and it has been mostly by white men and Asian men, historically. One of the key things that we can do as a center, because we do not directly bring in graduate students that are, say, working on these projects, or undergraduates, we're not involved in admissions decision, is making sure that students that might be considering coming to Northwestern to do research see that these are projects that directly impact communities, that can lead to good jobs, for example, where they too can then impact communities and give back, and show that these are, areas where they would want to work. And so that everybody who maybe would apply to Northwestern would say, hey, this is maybe not a field that I would have looked at historically, but there are opportunities for me here as well. And so Northwestern actually does again, within the departments that I can speak to, I don't know about everything, but within, say, chemical engineering, which is my home department, we try to do a good job of reaching out to universities across the country, recruiting at HBCUs, recruiting at other universities that have large minority populations, to say, hey, Northwestern may not be an institution you would originally thought of. But we're trying to do good research here that involves everybody. Being in the Chicago area is a huge draw for a lot of students because you can immediately see how you can, as you mentioned, give back to the community, make an impact locally. We're doing a lot of research on kind of the urban-suburban interface, because Chicago has this interesting water issues that you mentioned right at this urban-suburban water interface, and we think it's interesting to a lot of people. But yeah, we're working that way. I think I have an inclusive group individually, but it's always an interesting thing in this scenario because, you know, we can all try to make individual changes to, say, our home departments, our own research groups, and push upwards on the university as a whole to make it more inclusive. So it's something that everybody has to work on together.
Yeah, and the societal I guess word happening on the streets right now is that there's a push for inclusivity in every field. So we want to appreciate what you're doing and thank you for that.
I wanted to make an interesting comment too. So I was getting the exact phrasing today. So today actually is the start of scholar strike. I wanted to get the phrasing correctly.
Okay.
In particular, this is something that has been initiated by folks in several fields that at least the chemical engineering department, some members are going to be participating in. And this is specifically to protest the police shooting of Jacob Blake, who has a strong connection here to Evanston.
Absolutely.
That today and tomorrow, a lot of people are pausing research activities to have more learning activities. So for example, my research group's meeting would normally be tomorrow morning. One of the students in my research group does want to discuss his research tomorrow morning, so we'll do that for the first half, but then for the second half, we're going to be continuing. My son's doing gym right now, it seems. We're going to be continuing a discussion that the department started 2 weeks ago on research justice and inclusion within the research activity, to talk about things like how do we flatten power structures within the lab, how do we make sure that, you know, essentially who benefits from our research, who is negatively impacted from our research. So we're going to be having that conversation on Wednesday as kind of part of these activities for the scholar strike.
Wow, well, kudos to you, and that's an aspect of this conversation that I really didn't even expect. So, you know, wow.
I think these are important things to be looking at right now, and you know, it's unfortunate that the events precipitated this. Nobody wants to see the shootings of Black people in the city. Nobody wants to see any of this, but
Right.
I think it's good that it's provoking conversation at least.
Yeah, well, the overall conversation is we'd like our police not to feel like they need to kill people, period. It doesn't matter what their color is, but it seems like they feel a little freer to kill people of color than they do to not kill people. So,
and I mean, I have had students in my program directly impacted by this. We have seen this. I mean, students of color, when they're returning to the lab or returning to home late at night because experiments run at weird times,
yeah,
they are definitely less safe, and oftentimes from the police themselves, than my students who are white. And that is a tragedy.
yeah, it is. And for it to be touching your level of society, where you're talking about engineers and students who are, you know, paying $100,000 a semester almost to be at a university of this level, for them to even have to deal with this is a problem, man. So, you know, I thank you for bringing that up. That's a topic that the magazine does touch peripherally. So, wow.
Yeah, and one thing I would love to clarify is that anybody who's doing research in, say, chemistry, chemical engineering, all of the engineering and science disciplines at Northwestern, if they're doing research towards their PhD, if they're going towards their doctorate, they don't pay tuition and they get a stipend. So again, the narrative that people think about in terms of they're paying $100,000 to come to Northwestern is completely inverted once you get to the level of the PhD. And this is an area where Northwestern can make a difference in terms of equity, because there should not be any hardships that anyone would face to go to get their PhD. So.
Well, thank you for clearing that up
Yeah.
too. So that was it. Well, that kind of concludes the interview, and I really thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And we will put this a portion of this in the magazine itself,
Cool.
and then also on the website, and it'll be on YouTube and other things like that. So again, thank you, and I look forward to seeing some more of the Northwestern accomplishments.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Too. Bye.